today I thought I'd do another sit-down video. See, the dogs do this every time, I swear. Go outside. Anyway, so I thought I'd do another sit-down video. Everybody was really interested in all of the months leading up to when Sophia actually got help. So basically when she went to the NICU and had her feeding tube put in. So today I was going to talk about her first hospital admission, which was at our local hospital, and this is when she also was put on oxygen for the first time. So the other day, like, I didn't realize that it was this close, but Eric was home sick from work, and I drove to go get him some soup, and on the way home and they say that this happens with parents of kids with medical needs, and I just started getting flashbacks of all that time, and it's and so this is a hard week, and today is it was 3 years ago. So 3 years ago, Sophia was almost 2 months old, and she was still on hospice at this point. And we, up until at least for the first full month, I stayed in the living room with her all the time with the lights on and everything, and I stayed up all night. And by that time we had moved into the room, but I was still staying up. We had a tablet, and I was just playing games all night, so I was staying up 24 hours a day to watch her, because they were saying, she's going to die at any minute, and if you go to sleep, she's going to die. So I was like, well, then I'm not going to go to sleep. But they still had her on hospice, and we were home, and Eric was laying on the couch with her, and all of a sudden she got really stiff, and her eyes got really big, and she looked purple and scared, and then she just went limp and pale. And she was still breathing, but this happened, and so we were freaking out, but it didn't happen again. So the next morning I called the hospice nurse, and I asked her, what is going on, and they were like, her heart is about to fail. She only has 1 to 3 days left. And the hospice nurse came over, and we were talking to her about the fact that nobody would help Sophia, and this was a newer nurse, so she didn't realize that, we wanted help. She thought that we were just on hospice because of the diagnosis, and we were accepting or whatever. And so she was like, well, then there's a hospital in Arizona that could take her, or I would try taking her to Children's Hospital yourself, driving over to Denver and trying to get her admitted and not telling them about her diagnosis. So we actually started getting prepared to do that. We were trying to decide whether we were going to go to Arizona, Utah, or go to Denver. And so as we were deciding that, the hospice nurse had left, and Sophia did it. She did it the night, when Eric was asleep. She did it the night before the hospice nurse came again, that really stiff purple thing. And then the next day she did it again. So we decided to take her to the ER, because, if we're driving to Denver and she's having these things, who knows what's going to happen on the way. So we went into the emergency room, and her normal oxygen levels, and like we've said previously, hers sit lower anyway, but not this low. Normal oxygen levels for somebody with a healthy heart is 95 and above. And when we went in there and they put her on a monitor, she was at 38, and they brought a mask with blow-by oxygen into the room, and she reached her little head up to it, and they decided to admit her and put her into the hospice room. And they were gonna, they were saying she was gonna die. And even though I was not a fan of the pediatrics here at that time, one of the doctors did stay overnight. They slept at the hospital just in case something happened. And we had family with us the whole time and staying up with me because I was staying awake. At that point, Eric had taken 2 weeks after Sophia was born, and that was all the vacation time he had. So he was staying at the hospital and then going back to work the next day. So I was staying awake all night, and he was sleeping on the bed that they had in there. They had like a cot for us. And, they put her on oxygen, and she started eating a little bit better actually once they did that. And she got to 4 pounds, and that was like the biggest thing. Everybody thought, oh, she's never gonna get to 4 pounds. And I had been charting her weight, how much she ate, what she pooped. We had a scale at home. It was really stressful, and she had gone down without clothes. She was into 2 pounds. So she got up to 4 pounds, and so everybody was all excited. And one night she was laying on me, and there were a couple of funny nights. Like one night she was laying on me, and I finally fell asleep, and because I had, I think it was Eric's stepmom, and maybe my aunt and Eric's aunt, I can't remember. I don't remember. I was awake a lot, but I had actually fallen asleep for a few minutes, and I woke up and they were freaking out and like coming towards me, and I thought something was wrong with Sophia. But they had put the cannula thing, like it's a mask and then it goes over your ears, and adults will have it down here, and they had it down here, and she was pulling it, and her whole face was coming down because she hates oxygen. But one of the nights was the scariest, and this was also when we had our first care conference, and that made us scared for the next care conference that we had when we were in Denver, which we'll talk about that too, but not now. But I think the care conference came first. So in the care conference, and this was supposed to be deciding, her course of care, and we were trying to get her transferred to Denver. That's all we wanted to do. And her cardiologist at the time kept saying, oh no, they're not gonna take her. They're not gonna take her. We can't do anything to help her. We won't do anything to help her. And then, so we thought the care conference would be more of that kind of nature. So we went in, and we had the hospice nurse that came the very first time when we talked about her birth was no longer her hospice nurse. She moved. So we had a new hospice nurse. We had the hospice social worker, I believe is what they're called. And then we had my aunt and Eric's aunt. And then there was 2 doctors and it was the ethics committee. 2 doctors from the pediatrics, a few nurses from the hospital, some random guy. 1 to maybe 2 doctors from the community that we'd never met. There were quite a few people in this room. And the whole time it was basically just trying to convince us not to do CPR. We had taken the DNR off of her, and we wanted CPR done. And the doctor, my aunt asked a question about CPR, but not what he was thinking, and he described a horrific way of what CPR would look like, and it was awful, and he made everybody cry. And he kept just pushing on this. He came in late with Starbucks, and then he said that he met his wife over a kid with trisomy 18, and I thought, okay, this baby must have died, and that's why he's acting like this. Well, later on I found out this kid is still alive. So, but we were in the care conference, and everybody just kept saying, you know, and even the new hospice nurse, like, she was a nice person, but that was not the placement she should have been in at all. She had a mental breakdown in that conference and started yelling at us and said, "What are you doing? How could you do this to her?" And it was just awful. The only person, like, professional that was really on our side was the social worker, which she was great, but she wasn't a medical professional, so nobody was paying really any attention to her. And so they kept pushing, and finally the random ethics guy kept saying, like, what if I were Sophia, what would I think? And I was like, you know, I would think if you started not being able to breathe and you saw everybody standing around you wondering, why isn't anybody helping me, that would be worse. And he said something else, and I was like, if this were your kid, wouldn't you do CPR? He was like, no. And the pediatrician that I actually hadn't liked before, she was like, he doesn't know what he would do. He's never been in this situation, so that doesn't make any sense. Nothing but really mistrust and tears came from that ethics meeting. So it was pointless in my mind. So we went back to the room, and I was scared to leave with Sophia, but I also wanted to shove Sophia in their face, you know? I wanted to keep her there so they could not forget about her, and they could not forget what they would be doing if they didn't help her. And we didn't know that she had been ordered a slow code. And what that is if she were to get to a point with her sats or her heart rate where they would normally do CPR on any other person, they would act slower. They would not immediately jump on it. They would take a few minutes and wait, and we didn't know this. And that's another thing that, you know, DNRs had been put back on Sophia later on, but that was something that we didn't know either. And one night I woke up, or I was awake, I wasn't asleep, I was holding her, and they had the pulse ox monitor like trailing outside so the nurse could see it. I don't know why they had like this ghetto setup, really, because I know they have computer monitors in our emergency room that show the pulse ox that could connect easily to a computer. So I don't know why they had this, but they had a big bulky pulse ox that was attached to her and went out the door into the hallway. And I could hear it going off, and she went limp and gray, and her eyes were closed because she was asleep, but she I kept trying to get her to wake up, and she wouldn't wake up. And one of the nurses came in, and she said, can I see her? And that was the kind of the realization, like, why aren't they doing anything? But they looked petrified, and she was gray, and they were trying to stimulate her, and Eric was asleep when we woke him up, and she came back like she always has, but that kid. But that was probably the scariest night of that stay, because that, I don't know how low she went, because like I said, I couldn't see the numbers, but it was low enough that everybody on that floor came running in to the room. They had a crash cart outside, but they were waiting. That's part of the slow code. And so since we didn't trust them to do CPR on her, we asked to have somebody teach us CPR. And the lady came in and she taught us infant CPR. And Sophia was smaller than the doll that she used to teach us. And I guess she told us that, well, later on, that everybody outside was like, I don't know why they're doing this. They're just putting themselves through something for nothing. And on the records for that stay, it says parents in denial again. That's woven throughout Sophia's records from her first few months. And so it was just a few days before Thanksgiving, and I was going to be hosting that year if we were home. I didn't really care, but we decided to go home. They weren't really doing anything else. And Sophia graduated hospice at that point, which was good. And we had one of the pediatricians. He was actually my pediatrician when I was little. He had come in, and there was a bunch of drama that just happened that had nothing to do with us too. Like the doctor that stayed overnight in the sleep room fell off her ladder and had to be life flighted to a different town and had a brain bleed, and it was the craziest thing. So that doctor came, or the doctor that was my pediatrician came in crying, and oh my gosh, but he was saying, he was the only one at that point that was like, you know, we were treating her like her diagnosis says, but there comes a point where we need to start treating her differently. He was the only one that thought that at that point. But we were put on Volunteers of America for nursing, and they were coming, were they coming every day? They were coming every day for a while, and then they were coming every couple of days, and then once a week, and then they just kind of stopped coming unless we called them. But, and it's also when my maternity leave and FMLA, I took all my maternity leave and pushed my FMLA. We weren't planning on me being a stay-at-home mom, and I didn't want to leave my job. I loved where I worked. There wasn't a way for me to go back though, but it was just, everything was hard, and that's when I left. I had to go in and formally say that I was leaving, and I was crying, and it was just awful. But we finally got a pulse ox for Sophia. That pulse ox sucked, so we ended up buying one for her. And at 2.5 months, she rolled over by herself, which that's early for normal development. I luckily had videotaped it because the doctor didn't believe me until she saw the video of her doing it. And so a lot of you have commented about Sophia's development and stuff, and I think I've answered them all, but sometimes they don't give me notifications. But Sophia does fully understand everything we're saying. She can talk, not as well as another 3-year-old, but she speaks, she signs, she fully understands what is being said. She was ahead of the curve as far as milestones go until a few months after her birth, but we do think that the fact that she had gone from birth until 2 months without oxygen, and we have no idea how low her oxygen levels dropped, like I said in the birth video, that affected her. They also still refused to put in a feeding tube at that point, and she was still eating by syringe. So malnutrition probably played a role in her muscle development. It most likely ate away at some of her muscles, so she does have to work a lot harder than other kids to be able to move and do the things that she wants to. But she is fully a 3-year-old. I know that she doesn't always show it on camera, and so it's hard to convey that all the time, but eventually, hopefully, she will get more used to being on this camera. She's used to my phone being in her face all the time, but not having the big camera in front of her face, so she gets shy. But yeah, I thought that I would share that because today was the day that we were admitted, and I on Facebook they have that on this day, and I put that the next 3 days would be critical, but they said she was going to die in 3 days, and I didn't want to put that on social media, and so this is kind of hard. Even though it was 3 years ago, when those things come back into your head, it's like you're right there again. And I don't know what's going on with Sophia, but she had nightmares last night, and we put her in the bed with us, and this morning she was crying in her sleep again. I don't know I know they say you can't remember, but with that traumatic of an event, I wouldn't be surprised if she at least has some sort of emotional trauma. Maybe she doesn't remember the actual events, but it's just a little ironic that she's having nightmares right now. I could be wrong, but so I plan on vlogging this week or this weekend, depending. We were sick all last week, like I said. Eric threw up, then I had a sinus infection, a double eye infection. Sophia had a sinus infection and an ear infection, so you probably wouldn't have wanted to see us anyway. So we will be filming either during this week or the weekend. I have to get my Thanksgiving prep. I can't believe Thanksgiving is so close. We host every year now, and that's when we started, was that year, because me and Eric, when we were just first married, we would go from house to house. We had like 4 or 5 houses that we would drive to, and they were like in town, in another town, you know, half an hour away. It was chaos. And so that year I don't even remember fully being able to pull it off, but I did. I made the turkey. I did everything. I do not remember making the meal because like I said, I stayed up all the time. I stayed up 24 hours a day unless Eric was home, and I would sleep for an hour, or if a family member had come over and watched her, but I couldn't sleep more than maybe 2 hours at a time. So yeah, I'm gonna be doing Thanksgiving prep, and I realized I might do it on Thanksgiving or before then, I'm not sure, but I do have quite a few Thanksgiving decorations out. So if you guys wanna see a Thanksgiving decor tour, I could do that too. I don't know. I might just show on Thanksgiving because I'm not gonna have the tablescape out yet until then, because the dogs make it very dusty in here, and I don't want that to be dusty before then. So, and I need to dust every day, so that's harder with a tablecloth. If you have any questions about that stay or anything else, please feel free to ask. As long as I get the notifications, and other times I've gone back onto the video to make sure, I will answer the questions. So if you don't get an answer right away, it's probably because I didn't get the notification. And we're so excited. We have over 100 people. It's weird. Yeah, if you liked this video, I don't know, but give it a thumbs up. And if you're new to our channel, subscribe, and you will be seeing more stories and more vlogs of cute Sophia. And I think I'm going to try, as long as I can find the pictures, to insert a few pictures of Sophia from that stay, so you can see how small she was. And all of the dresses and everything are American Doll dresses, so they're baby doll dresses, so just to give you an idea of how small she was. But we will see you guys next time. Bye.